again.
I'll be right back.
Okay. Recording is now in progress.
If we don't hit continue, does it bump us off?
I don't know. We'll find out, I guess.
No, meeting would.
Okay. Oh, Susanna's joined us.
Her audio is working there. Just muted.
We see you, Suzanne. Hello. Yes. We thought you'd be camping today, but I hear your plans changed.
Yep, we are enjoying our home.
And your air conditioning. Yeah. Yes, I was just telling Bert that my thermostat wasn't working a few days ago. I knew this hot weather was coming, so I was able to get the heating company to come out yesterday and fix it in the nick of time. Right?
That's wonderful. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I suspicion they're going to be all very busy this weekend.
Very busy. Yes, I was lucky to get him to come out.
Yeah.
So now your heat will work, huh? That's great.
Yeah, I can heat the house now. Yeah. This is the one time of year that I love having all these trees. In the winter, I think I'm going to cut some of these trees down. It's too dark and gloomy, but then the summer, I love every tree.
You have new best friends, huh?
That's right. Every tree is my best friend.
Mhm. Yeah.
Until they fall down on your house.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's what actually I called a tree specialist to come and see what it would cost to take some trees down, because there's some pretty close to the house, and that was really worrying me after the ice storm.
Right.
So he said he would actually pay me for the trees, but he doesn't do any of the cleanup. So you got to take care of the trunks and all the branches. So I said, I think about it. So right now I love the trees. So anyway, well, we probably should get started. So tonight we're going to do, the topic is art and theology. And I chose this topic because I've enjoyed Paul Anderson's presentations on art and theology using the St. John's Bible. And I've always been interested in how art and theology kind of interact. So I've really kind of enjoyed his presentation. So I thought that for tonight, I would do something that would combine art and theology with some Quaker history. Because Quaker history is kind of my area of study. So art and theology and Quaker history. And I'm calling tonight's presentation, Art and Theology in Tension with Quaker History. Does anyone know why I would add the intention?
Okay.
Yes, there's the slide of the topic, Art and Theology in Tension in Quaker History. And we're going to talk about how it was resolved as well. But does anyone know why there would be tension with art in Quaker history?
That have something to do with simplicity?
Yes, it does, very much so. And what would that be? Could you be a little more specific?
Well, you don't live with anxiety about your diamonds and your wealth and all that sort of thing.
And buildings.
And buildings are built simply.
Yeah, it's partly due to the time, the context in which Quakerism began. And we have to remember that Quakers came out of Puritan stock, and those Puritans valued simplicity too. They didn't like ornamentation. Cathedrals were very ornate, and they wanted to take out all the art and all the ornamentation, as did the Quakers. So for Quakers, they had this aversion to art because they saw it as non-utilitarian. And it was also a witness against the fact that people with wealth, people with more privilege would have more ornate houses, would wear more ornate clothing. And so it was a witness kind of against class privilege. So for Quakers, plainness became a virtue. It became a testimony that we call simplicity today. We don't call it plainness anymore, and we're not actually all that plain, but it's kind of morphed into simplicity. Keep things simple. So for the early Quakers, they would wear very plain clothes, no buttons, no frills, no bows, very plain, and all gray fabric. And that was their testimony against simplicity. So art was considered a frivolous activity. It had no utilitarian purpose. And so there was a lot of tension with art and drama, novels, Shakespeare, the arts in general. Seems maybe strange to us today, but it made sense in the context in which they lived. So historically, Quakers were not supportive of the arts, and they weren't throughout all the 18th century and even into the 19th century. They really distrusted art. But there is one Quaker artist. There weren't very many. He may be the only one in the 18th century and the early 19th century. And some of you already had a little preview of who that was. I know Kara knows because I'm looking at one of his paintings right behind you. So that is Edward Hicks. So we can see the slide now. Bert, could you show us the second slide?
Yes.
Yep, that's Hicks.
It's also
Okay, there's Edward Hicks. Actually, a portrait of him, which in itself is very unusual. It's not a self-portrait. It was actually painted by his cousin, his younger cousin, Thomas Hicks, who was also an artist and who supported the work of artists. He was one of the very few at the time, and he painted this picture of Edward painting one of his famous Peaceable Kingdom paintings. I don't know if Edward actually sat for this painting or if he was totally approved of it, but anyway, we have it, and now we know what Edward looked like, and we know that he was an artist. However, he was never known as an artist in his lifetime, okay? But things did begin to change, and we're going to look at that and how art came to be kind of reconciled in Quaker history. So anyone else have a painting of Edward Hicks in their home? Peaceable Kingdom, that's his most famous. No, we probably have one in our church. Most Quaker buildings will have an Edward Hicks painting. So let me give you a little biographical information, a little background and context. Hicks is really a unique figure in Quaker history simply because he was an artist. Today, he's considered one of America's greatest folk artists or primitivist. They call his paintings primitive. That a Quaker would attain such fame is pretty ironic, since Quakers, even throughout his lifetime, were still kind of anti-art. And yet now he's considered a famous painter. He never was so in his own time. It wasn't really until the 1930s that his art was kind of rediscovered. And not until 1960 was there a gallery showing of his art. And at that time, they called it modern art. They thought it was more modern because it was so symbolic. And nowadays it's called primitive or sometimes folk art. Anyway, Edward's life is really interesting. Most people think that he was born a Quaker, but he was not. He was actually born to an Anglican family, a wealthy Anglican family. But the Anglicans at the time, at least his family, was a loyalist during the Revolution. So after the Revolution, his family were ostracized, and basically they were impoverished. There were also Quakers who were loyalists too, and many of them fled to England, fled to Canada, but they were supportive of England for the most part because they were against war. So there were Quaker loyalists, there were Anglican loyalists, and he came from an Anglican family, but then his parents lost all their money after the war. And then his mother died when he was just 18 months old. And so his father was unable to care for him. And so his father had him go live with friends of the family. Their name was David and Elizabeth Twining. And that painting that Kara had a picture of, that actually is their farm, the Twining's farm, where Edward Hicks was raised. And he was just a year and a half at the time. And there's the picture of the Twining residence. And he was raised essentially as a Quaker by Elizabeth, who cared for him like her own son. So he was reared as a Quaker, though he did not join with Friends until 1803, when he was 23 years old. And he writes in his journal, many Quakers kept journals of their kind of spiritual journey, that as a youth, as a teen, that he was kind of wild and rebellious, which is very typical of some Quakers in their journals. They talk about their rebellious period, and then they kind of come back to Quakerism, and then they join the church, they join the meeting, and many of them actually become ministers. And Edward did. He actually became a minister, was recorded as a minister at age 31, and he became a very devout Quaker at this time. But also in his young adulthood, the family, the Twining family, apprenticed him to a coach builder. And so he did painting on coaches, painting and lettering, and he discovered that he had a real talent for it, and he actually had a passion for art. And so he learned how to paint coaches and do paint furniture and household objects and signs. Now, even that trade wasn't particularly approved of by Quakers, but at least they allowed it. But he wasn't at this time yet doing what we would call easel painting, that is painting of landscapes or portraits. That would have been totally taboo. But after he became a minister, and that's what he was famous for, pretty much his whole life, he was famous as a very powerful preacher, traveled in the ministry, and was not known at all as an artist. But as he started in his ministry, he began to feel convicted about being even an artist who did ornamental art. And so he gave it up, and he decided to try farming. Here we have another picture of a farm of friends of his. And he has many farm paintings. He obviously loved nature, and he loved farming, but he was not good at it all. It just wasn't his thing, and he failed at farming. But he also got married. He had a family to support. He had eventually 5 children. And so he had to go back to his trade as a coach decorator in order to provide for his family, to support his family. Because pastors and ministers were not paid at this time. They all had other vocations. They were essentially bivocational. Many were farmers, but he had to find a way to support his family. So he returned to his trade, and then was compelled really to continue his ornamental painting. Eventually, some of his fellow Quakers came to appreciate his art because they saw it, particularly his Peaceable Kingdom paintings, as kind of visual sermons. And so his art was reluctantly accepted by the Quaker community. But as I say, in his day, he was not known as an artist, only as a preacher. And he wasn't really recognized till the 20th century. The Peaceable Kingdom painting, we're going to see two videos that talk about his Peaceable Kingdom paintings. They're his most famous, and those paintings he never did for commission. He never sold them. He only gave them away, and he had at least 60 some variations on the theme of the Peaceable Kingdom, all of which are very symbolic and express not only Quaker theology, but also some of the context of what was happening within Quakers at that time. And so his passion for this theme was just remarkable. The fact that he would do all these different versions of this same theme. It also showed his devotion to the Bible and his love of children and animals and nature, as you'll see in these paintings. So Bert, if you want to go through, I've got just a few slides of some of his various paintings. So if you could show a few more. Here's one, he just called it Landscape. Okay, the next. This is Falls of Niagara. He loved doing outdoor scenes. And he also would often have Bible verses or poetry that he would put around the frame of the painting, which probably came from his sign painting. Yeah, could you show the next one, Bert? He also did historical paintings, and these were probably commissioned by people. This is Washington crossing the Delaware. And you can see he wasn't just a primitive painter, just a folk artist. He could do portraits and really beautiful works of art. Even though he was never trained, he was always self-taught. Okay, the next. This is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He lived near Philadelphia his whole life in Bucks County area. So lots of his scenes are kind of Philadelphia landscapes and Philadelphia history.
Carole, is that painting right there on a $2 bill?
I don't know, is it? That's a good question. I hadn't thought of it.
Because the guy in the back, I forget his name, Dixon or something.
Oh,
is a Quaker,
Dickinson,
has his
yeah.
hat on. And the $2 bill looks just.
Oh, really? Well, that's possible. Yeah, Dickinson was a Quaker. I think the one Quaker among the signers. Interesting. Anyone have a $2 bill on them? We can check it out. Well, we'll do that later. Okay, show the next one, Bert. If anyone has any comments or questions as I show these. Okay, here's one.
I do have a $2 bill right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it have that painting on it?
Can you see that?
Well, not with.
Yeah, the light's not good enough, but it's, yeah, it looks like it is that.
Oh, okay, that's very interesting. I didn't know that. Well, the teacher has learned something from the student tonight, which is often the case. Teachers learn from students. Okay, now we're to the Peaceable Kingdom. I have several different versions of it. Here's one of the famous versions. Many of his paintings are actually in the National Gallery of Art. And you'll notice on this painting, there's like a ravine here. This isn't one of the earlier ones. In the very early Kingdom ones, there's a very small ravine, but the ravine keeps getting larger towards the end of his life. And a lot of people that look at this painting and try to interpret it think that the ravine represents the divide that was happening in Quakerism, because this was the period of time in 1828, Quakers split for the first time historically. They had been kind of this one seamless garment, but in 1828, they split into what was called the Orthodox Quakers and the Hicksite Quakers. Now, Hicksite Quakers were not named after Edward Hicks, but they were named after his cousin, Elias Hicks, who was also a preacher, famous preacher, and his name was attached to the Hicksite branch of Quakers. And the two branches, it's hard to kind of just categorize them simply. In one of the videos, the narrator says that the Orthodox were the conservatives and the Hicksites were the liberals. But that really wasn't true at the time. There were very conservative Orthodox, there were very conservative Hicksites, there were Orthodox who were more innovative, there were Hicksites who were more innovative. So it's really hard to sort that out. I think the major difference between the two branches, where the Orthodox tended to be more biblically oriented, more doctrinally and biblically oriented, the Hicksites tend to be more mystically oriented, and they put a lot of weight on the authority of the inward light. The Orthodox did as well, but not as much. They put a little more authority, like the primary authority was the Bible. For the Hicksites, it was the inward light of Christ. So that's probably the major difference between the two. Also, sociologically, the Orthodox tended to be urban and businessmen and wealthier, and the Hicksites tended to be farmers and rural and maybe not as wealthy. So there were some sociological differences too, but not totally. There were some in each camp, but people have studied it, say that definitely it was kind of a rural urban divide as well. Okay, so the next slide, Bert.
Did you mute?
Okay, here is a painting of Penn's treaty with the Native Americans. This is a very famous scene in Quaker history. Penn wanted to coexist with the Native Americans. Now, you may remember that he was given the land of Pennsylvania by the King of England as a debt to his father, but the King of England didn't really own this land. It was occupied by the Native Americans. So Penn actually wanted to pay for the property and wanted to exist with the Native Americans. Of course, the whole idea of owning property is the white Western thing. For the Native Americans, there was no sense of ownership. So even Penn, representing the Quakers, who were very egalitarian, and he treated the Indians really equally and really fairly, but there was still this sense of white ownership of property, and that the Native Americans didn't really understand that concept. So that was problematic. But still, they say this was the only treaty, he made a treaty with the Indians, it was the only treaty never sworn to, but the only treaty that was ever kept. So Native Americans really did respect Penn and appreciate him, because he treated them certainly more kindly and fairly than pretty much just about anyone else at the time. So, and Hicks really focused a lot on Penn's treaty, and you'll see that appears in his Peaceable Kingdom paintings. Okay, could you show us the next, Bert? Okay, here's the early Peaceable Kingdom one. This is a little different. This one, you'll see Penn's treaty just a little bit in the background there. You can hardly see it on this painting. If you saw the painting in person, you would. But the treaty symbolism gets larger at different times in the painting. Okay, next one, Bert. Here's another one. This one is really interesting because it actually has the Annunciation theme and the peace and goodwill to men in this group of people. In the video, there'll be more explanation of what this means. And again, it's the lion and the lamb and this passage from Isaiah, which in the video you'll hear more about. Okay, I think there's one more painting I want to show you. There it is, another Peaceable Kingdom. I really like this one a lot. I love the way the child is holding the lion, just like it's his pet dog. And here it has the Isaiah passage on the frame. And there's Penn and his treaty with the Lenape Indians in the background. Okay, so that's the slideshow. And now we're going to see two videos. Each one is about 7 minutes, looking at his Peaceable Kingdom paintings. And one takes place in the the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and it's kind of historical perspective and interpretation. And the second one is more of a spiritual meditation on his paintings. So they're very different kind of versions of looking at his paintings.
Are these
So,
oil? Carole, were these oil?
yes, they're oil. Yes, he painted in oil. Any other questions before we look at the video? Some of your questions may be answered in the video, but any other questions or comments before we look at the video? Okay, well, you may have questions and comments after. Okay, Bert or Bob, whoever is going to share the screen, the first video, the one in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Make sure you unmute so you can hear it. And we're not hearing the narration. Bert, is there a problem with it?
You're not hearing the narration?
No,
You're just seeing the picture?
yeah,
Okay, just a moment. Let's see if I can get this to do better.
okay.
I'm hearing the audio, so I don't know why it's not playing the. Let's see if this is it. Are you hearing it there?
No, I can hear a little background noise. It sounds like from where you are, but we're not hearing the audio.
Okay, why don't we? If it's not working on my end, then I'll ask Bob to play from his end to see if it works.
Bob, to try it. Okay, hope it works on his screen. This is a problem with technology. Sometimes it just doesn't work.
Bob, you want to talk to us? Is it? We can see half of it on the screen.
Yeah, you had it before when we practiced it.
Is that the right one or that's the other one?
Well, actually, you can do either, whichever one.
Okay,
Works.
let's try it again here.
Okay. Yeah, we're not getting full screen. We're just getting like the little banner.
Yeah. Bear with me.
Okay.
I think that's the right one. You get what you pay for here with me. Let's see.
We're gonna double your salary.
Why don't you just go out of that, whatever you have on the screen now, and just redo the link. Click on the link.
Yeah, that's where I'm headed.
Yeah. If you had it before.
See if I can get rid of the other one. Okay.
We're still seeing the banner.
Yeah.
Bob, you should stop sharing your screen for a moment.
Okay.
There we go.
I gotta get out of full screen. I don't know why it doesn't just play.
Yeah, because you did have it before. It was working. What happens when you just click on the link?
That's what I did.
Oh, and it didn't come
Okay.
out?
Nope, let me try a different one. Let's go to this one.
And then you have to click on share screen. Nothing happening, huh?
I'm trying to find the share screen thing. Yeah.
That should be at the bottom. On mine, it's green. It says share screen, the little arrow.
Let's see here. Um,
You see the bar at the bottom?
I had to get the Zoom meeting back on my screen. I had kind of
Oh,
lost that. Full screen that. Share screen there. Okay, let's try this.
okay.
Just a little side story. My grandfather, my mother's side was from the Blackburns. Blackburns were Irish Quakers that came over in 1730. And they were at that treaty with the
Oh,
Indians.
really?
I just read this week in the Blackburn News. They're going to have a reunion July 31st at Min Allen meeting in Pennsylvania, because that's where some of the Quakers could then develop a church after the treaty. 1738.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah.
Patty and I are going to Ireland next summer to the original church or churches, meeting houses of those Blackburn family. So that's going to be fun.
Wow, I didn't realize you were Quakers from basically the first generation, maybe the second probably the second generation of friends. Yeah, wow, that's impressive. You're more than birthright.
Well, nothing of my doing, I can tell you that.
I don't know
So-
if any, yeah. So what's happening, Bob?
I was playing that. Were you not hearing it?
Nope,
Oh,
Okay.
it wasn't, the screen wasn't shared for some
Okay.
reason.
Well, let's try. I had hit screen share. Let's see why that didn't do it. I was enjoying it.
Oh, you were enjoying it, but we weren't seeing it. Screen share, and then you've got to click on I think, the video where it shows up on your screen.
Yeah, I was seeing it and hearing it,
Huh,
kind of like Bert. Okay, let's share screen. So I'm gonna hit play. Tell me if you hear it or don't.
It hasn't said you are sharing the screen yet, so it's not coming up on our screen.
Okay.
Bert, do you have any suggestions?
I was
Maybe-
thinking through it. Yeah. So it's not, yeah, Bob, it's not popping up, like your screen is not popping up in the first place. Are you selecting that when you say share, it gives you options of what window you want to share. You highlight that one and then you click share, correct?
Well, I hit share screen. I wasn't seeing the options that you're talking about.
Oh.
I do the little caret. Do the little caret. Advanced sharing options? No.
No, you just click where the little green box, click that, and then it should, a white window comes up with all the windows
Oh.
that you have open on your computer.
Okay, it was hidden.
Ah.
There you go.
Okay, now you got it.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
There you go.
Thanks for your patience, folks.
Okay, full screen.
That's good, yes. Now you just have to start it.
There it is.
Where's the audio, though? We're not hearing the audio.
I hear it.
Same as problem you had, Bert. We're not hearing the audio. We're just seeing the images.
Yeah.
Well, we'll send everybody the link.
Yeah, you might have to just watch it yourself.
Huh.
Yeah, the audio
So
should.
you see seeing art history, but if I hit play, you don't hear anything. Is that right? And I've got
We don't hear it.
So Bert, this is-
volume up.
so
Same thing that you have, Bert, I guess.
Yeah, the volume is not coming through.
can we
Sorry,
do
Carol.
closed caption? It looks like it's got closed caption.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Music's nice though.
Yeah, you're not gonna hear the music, but that's okay if we can get the captions. Oh, but you're not gonna hear the audio part, I don't think.
No, but with closed captions there, see, there we at least see what you're
Okay.
saying.
So it's quoting the Isaiah passage. The music was wonderful.
Oh, I thought this is where Dwight and Bob and sing and Shirley plays.
Let's hit it. Let's hit it.
What's that?
Now we're seeing your
Okay.
audio screen. Yeah, you just have to read it. That's quoting from his own sermon. Well, there you have it. Not quite the way I had hoped it would be presented, but hopefully you got a taste of what she was saying with the words. They weren't always easy to read, no periods. And some of the words were not actually spelled correctly, but it gives you a good kind of sample of his theology and how that was expressed in his paintings of the peaceable kingdom, expressing the Bible theology from the passage in Isaiah, as well as Quaker theology and the testimony of peace, which was so important to him, and his desire for peace. He kind of understood that it was not quite. It was still to come. We hadn't really perfected it, so it wasn't ideal. So something he always hoped for. And he was quite disillusioned when the split happened among Quakers, and towards the end of his life, he was pretty cynical about this peace that he had hoped would happen in his lifetime would never occur. So that's kind of his story, kind of in a nutshell. And I think that even today, we see that Quakers continue to splinter. We still need reconciliation. We're still dividing. Northwest Ely Meeting just divided not so long ago. So even within our own communities, we're still seeing fissure and splitting, and peace and reconciliation is still needed. So questions about Hicks, his paintings, or just comments on the video or the background, the context of his times? Just any other comments you might have?
I don't have a comment on his times, but I do have a comment about what I would call aspirational goals.
Mhm.
And I think I'm coming to the conclusion that it's more important that you have the aspirational goals than that you reach them, because it's more the journey than the end. And I think in an odd way that helps also guard against cynicism, because cynicism in myself, and I've seen in others, is when what you believe is ideal doesn't happen, you become a cynic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in some ways, it's another way of saying you've got the right answer, because yours didn't show up. You now have a right to be cynical. And I don't think that's a good rabbit hole to go down. So I guess I'm struck by how important it is to have those aspirational goals, because they end up becoming incredible beacons to us, in our decision making, either consciously or subconsciously. Because you have to make I think we make choices when we're confronted with information and we have to make a value choice. Those beacons become very important to us in how we choose to spend our time, our energy, or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the thoughts that were going through my head.
Yeah.
And the other one had nothing to do with that, except I wanted to show you all, since it had to do with art.
Mm-hmm.
And animals and folk art. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this.
Yeah, we can see it.
There's 4 animals. There's an elephant, a monkey. Yeah, there you go. An elephant, a monkey. So this is called the 4 harmonious friends. And in Bhutan, this is kind of their story. Every household seems to have this picture on it, of some kind. And the story behind there's a lot of value and moral behind this, but I was struck by it as I saw his painting, partly because it was folk art, partly because of the different animals that lay down together. And when I first saw this on a wall in Bhutan, I thought, how wonderful that here in a totally different part of the world, they also speak to the need to respect the differences. You hear the story being told there, they will talk about respect the differences, that we have to have unity, see each other's strengths, and together we can accomplish tasks that we couldn't accomplish by ourselves, such as getting the fruit from the top of the tree, or, however they spin it. So I'll share that.
Thank you for showing that painting. That's fascinating. It really is parallel to the Hicks painting, but from a totally different religion, which had similar values and similar ideals, but expressed in their own idiom. So that's fascinating. Thanks for showing us that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, and I agree too that the aspirational goals, the ideal goals, we still need those, even though we're not seeing them happening now. And I don't think that Hicks ever became totally cynical, but he was a little disillusioned. He was a little disappointed in Quakers, but he still always felt that there was this kingdom coming that would be the peaceable kingdom. He always hoped for that. I don't think he ever gave up. In fact, he was painting the last version of the peaceable kingdom just before he died, which he was painting for his daughter. So it was still always his aspirational goal.
Good.
Carole, there's another Quaker artist, a Canadian friend, whose name is Fritz Eichenberg, and he focuses his artwork.
Go ahead and talk.
He focuses his artwork on the peaceable kingdom as well.
Oh, yeah.
He's probably a little bit older than I am, but this was a gift from him when I was at French United meeting.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, I've heard of him. He has a very famous painting of people standing in line for a soup kitchen during the Depression that I've seen many
Right.
times.
He's a
like-
really interesting.
Mhm. But this is
Yeah.
fascinating because obviously he is it's a takeoff too on Hicks's painting of the peaceable kingdom. He's even using the same scripture, but in his own style. So you can see the way that
Called it-
yes, continued to impact other painters, even other Quaker painters.
Very interesting.
He did this in 1983. And he put the quote at the bottom of the painting, "And a little child shall lead them," from Isaiah 11.
Same scripture that Hicks used. Yeah, and the little child represents Christ, the Christ child. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's great. Yeah, anyone else have some art to share? Or some questions or comments or thoughts related to what we've just talked about? What do you have, Bob? Oh, I can't, you're muted. I can't hear you. Now you're muted.
My 3-year-old grandson painted that. So you have to use your imagination about what the animals are.
Oh, yeah, well, that's definitely modern art, very symbolic.
But I love the bright, cheery colors, Bob.
Yes, beautiful.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I believe all children are natural artists, but what happens, they grow up, become adults, and they say they can't draw, right? But
Yeah.
have you ever known a child that couldn't draw or didn't love art?
No.
Yeah.
I loved it, but I would not say I was a natural artist.
Some are more gifted than others, but I do think that every child is an artist. Any other comments or paintings to share?
Just a reminder, there are many different forms of art.
Mhm.
I always, when I was tailoring, I always felt when I was tailoring for people that was an artistic, I don't have any, what we traditionally think of art. I don't have any of those talents, but designing and producing clothing that is good for a particular person is I tell myself it's an artistic thing.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's definitely art as well. In fact, some people would call it more of a craft than an art, but what's so interesting is that Quakers who did have gift for art later, like the late 19th, early 20th century, even though they were technically artists, they would only call themselves craftsmen because that was more acceptable because it was a craft. And there were plenty of Quakers who were doing crafts and who were had businesses creating furniture. Now they would keep it, not real ornate, but they were creating furniture. They were architects. Architecture was seen as a little more acceptable than just easel painting was really problematic, particularly portrait painting, because it was seen as kind of vanity to have your portrait painted, right? To sit for a painting.
So what do you think they think of the selfies?
They probably think that was vanity too, but I know times changed and there are plenty of Quaker artists today. And actually by the probably mid 20th century, maybe even earlier, all Quaker schools and colleges had art departments and they taught art. So times did change gradually, and Quakers came to be, very acceptable, finding art very acceptable and a useful activity. But initially it was seen as non-utilitarian.
It is communication, though.
Definitely. And I think that Hicks really made the difference among Quakers because they saw his paintings actually as sermons, visual sermons, a way to teach and preach through art. And so art came to be seen as having a actually spiritual purpose, which is how Hicks saw it. He felt that it was a spiritual endeavor. Now, we did do portrait painting by people that commissioned him, but that's how he supported his family. And that was where all the money was. He got paid for painting portraits of people. So he was practical as well. But one of the things I find so fascinating about his story is that he had these artistic gifts that just compelled him to paint, despite the fact that his community was anti-art and didn't approve of it. And he loved his community. He was devoted to his community. So he had that tension between gifts that he was given and yet what the community didn't value. But he was so compelled that he continued to paint his whole life. And eventually the community came to respect and accept his vocation as part of his ministry.
I think
Yeah.
rather
John?
ironic that here was a Quaker. I'm thinking of William Penn now, who met with the Indians. A group of Quakers and Indians were able to meet together and sign a treaty that was honored.
Mhm.
And within 100 years, we had this split that took place in the late 1820s. And it's interesting that we had 4 different schools that were under an education committee in the Philadelphia Quakers, one of which was the William Penn Charter School, in which William Penn had signed a charter in 1711 to start the school. And then in the next century, we find that the Quakers started talking about real Quakers versus those that pretend to be Quakers. And we had a school startup that was known as a Friend Select School,
Mhm.
because they would only select the real Quakers.
Mhm. Yeah.
To sit down with Indians and come to some kind of agreement. Within a century, we had ourselves splitting.
Mhm.
And we continue to fall in that path. And so I think we just have a real need for continued reconstruction and renewal of aspirations to find ways that we can pull ourselves together rather than finding ways of pulling ourselves apart. It's a real challenge.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I had a friend when I was growing up who attended Friends Select School. By the time she attended it, you didn't have to be a Quaker. And she was not a Quaker, nor was the family, but they had a lot of money and they could afford to send their daughter to this very expensive Quaker school. Even like the Sidwell School in Washington, D.C., where all the president's kids go. I mean, it's a very select school and very expensive, and really a school for privilege. Although I think they do give scholarships now and they have some diversity there. You probably know more about that, Kara.
Well, the current chief officer of the FCNL, her children have gone to Friends Select or Sidwell
Mhm.
in DC. She's on the board, and she's very pleased with the fact that their a major part of their curriculum is Quaker testimonies and Quaker principles and all that, applied to art and science and all those kinds of things. Just that's current.
Mhm. Yeah, it's considered one of the top private schools in the country, Sidwell. Yeah. Yeah. There is irony there because Quakers initially weren't proponents of well, schools, elementary schools, but higher education, no. And they were against particularly, Oxford, you didn't go to Oxford to become a minister. But gradually Quakers became educators, and that became one of their strong kind of vocations, and they established schools. So it just shows you how often as the context changes, Quakers do change, and they revise some of their original ideas, but they keep their basic ideals, which we call the Quaker testimonies. And
Yes.
simplicity is one, and that was the issue here in tension with art. But that idea of plainness, that austere plainness, eventually kind of morphed into simplicity. So the ideal is still there, but it is practiced a little differently. And I'm really glad that Quakers are willing to continue to kind of revise and reform some of their initial ideas, and make it more relevant and more applicable to the context in which they live. And of course, some of that has caused divisions though as well. People have different ideas where you draw the line, and where you are accommodating to culture rather than being countercultural. Because Quakers were initially very countercultural, but they also recognize that in time you have to kind of accommodate to the culture that you're in as well. But where you draw the line is where the tension begins. Other thoughts, ideas?
Have any of you seen that tapestry of George Fox that's about, I don't know, 8 feet by 10 feet of the
That's fun.
treaty? The tapestry is from the 1800s, I believe.
That must be it. The Treaty of William Penn was 16. It was in the video. It was the late 17th century. So I wonder if that's the same treaty.
Well, the tapestry hung in Woodmar for years and years and years. Then it was moved, when Woodmar was remodeled, it was moved to the library. And
Is
then,
it Tapestry of Penn's treaty that? Like a
yes,
copy? Oh, okay.
and it's behind glass, and it's very, very old, and maybe it's been put away in the vault. I've been trying to find a picture of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can't find a picture of it.
Hmm. Well, Quakers became quite well-known and very gifted in creating tapestries. There's an entire collection, it's the Quaker tapestry in Kendal in England. I've been there to see it. And it's a whole visual image of Quaker history done through tapestries. Has anyone seen it? I've seen it, and I know Mark has seen it. In fact, I was going to do something about the tapestries for this Zoom tonight, but I had a DVD that we couldn't use, so that's why I switched. And we couldn't really use the YouTube either tonight for some reason. But it's interesting that Quaker, the passion for art was kind of diverted into other means, and creating tapestries was one of those.
Can you see this Quaker tapestry?
Yes, yes, we can. Yes, that's one of them, isn't it? That's one of the famous Quaker tapestries, the World Family of Friends. Yep, it's showing some of the different tapestries. It's a fascinating visual history of Quakerism from this early 17th century, the beginnings, all the way up until today. They keep adding to. And it was started, I think, somewhere in the, I don't know, maybe 1950s or so, when they started creating these, and hundreds of people have contributed, men and women and children, to these tapestries, and they're beautiful. I think we have a book in our library at Reedwood that has all the tapestries in it, because I was there and I purchased that book for Reedwood, so I hope it's still there in the library if anyone's interested. But that is a fascinating way to to write your history through tapestry. I think it's unique to Quakers. So Quakers have always had artists, but the art has been directed into different crafts, as Carole was saying. And that's all art. Anyone else have any thoughts, comments, questions? Well, we are a little past our time. Sorry we didn't get to see the first video, and I'm sorry that we had such a hard time showing the video and we couldn't really get the audio and the music, which really enhances it. But I can send everyone the link to the YouTube and you can watch it. I'll send you the link. So if you're really interested and want to actually hear it with the actual narration and music, I'll send that to this group that was here to kind of compensate for what we didn't get to experience tonight. Okay, well, let's just close with a word of prayer. Thank you, Jesus, for giving us gifts of art and beauty and an aesthetic sensibility. Thank you for artists who had to break the barriers among Quakers, such as Edward Hicks, in order to be able to use his gifts and his passion for his ministry. Thank you that we were able to see his paintings today and help us to assimilate and understand what he was trying to convey to us. And may we still maintain our idealistic visions of peace and work for peace in the world and reconciliation. We ask in your name, amen. Okay, thank you all.
Thanks, Bert, for interrupting your time there at Eagle Crest.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thanks,
your help.
Bert. Yeah, and thanks, Bob, for trying to work through the share screen, but sometimes these things just don't work out and we just have to play it by ear. Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Hi.
Yeah, I think Bert has to close
Thank you,
it.
Carole.
Keep cool, everybody. Keep cool.
Yeah, keep cool.